to the Midland Public Library celebration for International Women's Day. This month, we've chosen to celebrate the achievements of women through a series of interviews, candid conversations with women in unique careers. You can join us every Monday in March at 7 p.m. for these special conversations with our honored guests. My name is Jen Paquette, and I am the Adult and Teen Services Coordinator here at the Midland Public Library, and I'll be your host for this event. The Midland Public Library acknowledges and is thankful for the opportunity to work on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe people, which includes the Chippewa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa people. We especially acknowledge the Chippewa of Beausoleil First Nation and Rama First Nation, who are the stewards of the lands in and around Midland. We also recognize the Métis nationhood, currently represented in our community by the Georgian Bay Métis Council. We recognize and deeply respect their ongoing and historic connection to these lands. These connections need to be clearly and overtly articulated as part of our collective agreement to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. We're so pleased to be hosting Carole as the first of our guests in this series. I first met Carole almost 10 years ago when I worked for the Midland Cultural Center. She was part of the team that designed and built that building. A University of Waterloo architecture grad, Carole has been practicing architecture for around 30 years, including 9 years working with IHD Design, Build, and Quantum Engineering in Tiny Township. She founded her own company in 2015 and is currently based in Kitchener and Waterloo. Notable projects she's been involved with include the Hartog House, Lakeview Apartments, Ontario Vipassana Center, Midland Cultural Center, and the BANAC King Street expansion. She continues to be involved with projects in North Simcoe and around Ontario. She enjoys spending time outdoors, singing, and generally carousing with her young family. Please join me in welcoming Carole Boucher. Carole, thanks so much for being here this evening.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
We were just chatting a little bit before, and with a young family, I understand all too well what this time frame is all about. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us and helping us celebrate International Women's Day. We're grateful for your willingness to share your story with us. So let's jump right in. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your career as an architect? You know, do architects spend all day at their drafting tables, or what are some of your roles and responsibilities like?
So now pretty much everything's online. So we're all on computers like everybody else. We just like to have as big a screen as possible because then the drawing is kind of legible. I work with a 3-dimensional program so that pretty much everything I'm drawing you can sort of see it in different dimensions, which has been super helpful for communicating with clients. And actually, I've been doing online meetings with clients for some time because then I can share my screen and we can look at the model together, and that's kind of fun. And yeah, I think that, you know, there's this sort of like Starchitect thing that people know from celebrity kind of culture of architecture, which is not usually, it's not what most people get to live. And that there is the sort of design creative piece, and then there's like a project management piece, and there's dealing with clients and all their kind of, you know, articulations, and then, you know, consultants, and there's just a lot of different things that, and then you're on site and dealing with technical problems. So it's actually quite a diverse mindset. And every client, every project is a different animal. So then it keeps it quite interesting. You can't really assume much about the next client from things you've already done. So yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of variety and there aren't too many dull moments, that's for sure.
Yeah, you could say that. There's parts you like better than others. Yeah.
Fair. And how does being the business owner compare to working as a part of a team? How have things sort of shifted for you in that aspect?
It's actually been really interesting. So I've had my own practice for almost like 6 years now, and there's a lot of surprises. Like actually, I feel much more connected to the community at large, and to any person anywhere could be a collaborator. So it feels quite open. And people are very, especially other sort of self-employed people, are very interested in kind of discussing things because they also are alone all day. So that's been actually a really great discovery. Um, and then the other piece is just that you kind of have more. I have a bigger feeling of personal agency in the work because I can sort of speak my mind. I'm not, somebody else is not sort of like setting things up for me, and then I have to just sort of figure out what did they do. Like I can kind of make the relationship with the client something that's authentic within my skills, and that feels very, very good. It's interesting because there's still kind of like I do have sort of relationships with other sort of self-employed people that we kind of check in on each other, like, hey, what do you think, sort of thing. And that's been really great to sort of develop those relationships. Yeah, no, it's been pretty. I mean, the big shakeup, of course, is that you have to get your own work, which you don't learn about when you're in an office. So it's like, oh, how do you do that? Yeah, so that's been fun, but it seems to be coming, and the word gets out, and then people who enjoyed working with you, then they sort of tell their colleagues and friends, and then hopefully it kind of grows from there. Yeah.
You've worked on a variety of different projects, a lot very local to us here in Midland. What inspires your work and your designs?
Yeah, it's always the client and what their kind of aspiration is, and then you try to sort of maybe, kind of bring maybe more of an environmental kind of, awareness into it, or more of a, awareness of different kind of users of their building or whatever. But I mean, in the end, you're sort of, we're a service industry. So it's really about what the client articulating and kind of figuring out what the client really needs, which is sometimes quite challenging because they don't necessarily know how to say it, or yeah, so that's always quite interesting. And then there's always kind of, the relational piece, like related to where it is, to the nature, to environmental components, to social components. There's all kinds of different kind of lenses that we kind of engage in and look at the work. So it's bringing a lot of that to it also. And sometimes it's kind of what I think is important to the project too, which seems to be really well received because I'm thoughtful and yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah.
So I read two things. So one, it seems that architects, more than I really realized, are these sorts of a bit of the role of a translator. You're taking all of these other elements, environmental, what you were saying about what the client needs, whether they know how to articulate that or not. And so you're taking all this information and you're outputting it in this sort of spatial design. So that's kind of cool, and not a way I would have thought of architecture before. The second thing I'm thinking, or question I have is, I often talk to authors, and we often discuss like the research process for them putting out a piece of work. If you're taking on a project that you might not be, do you take on projects that you are less familiar with? And is there a research process where you're sort of looking into, okay, how might someone use this type of space?
Absolutely. I think absolutely 100%. And it's very, it's exciting because you don't know, and then it's this opportunity to talk to people who do have experience. So like, for instance, for Hartog House, which for folks that don't know is a 20-unit transitional housing apartment building. So for folks that just to sort of get stable housing for a year and all kinds of support so that hopefully they go on to support themselves and independently. So I didn't know about that. So I found all these different agencies across the province, rural, urban, and just said, hey, how's it going? What did you do? What do you like? What's your favorite part? What's the part that was the worst that you would never do again? Or what do you wish you'd done? Anyway, it was so fascinating. And it just brought up all kinds of things that I just never would have known. And then we were able to incorporate them and then to have a much more successful project, I think, in the end. So absolutely. And then with the MCC, I mean, there was lots of research with that, like other kind of performance venues, but then also like how is the, you know, what are the kind of things in the community that are influencing this? And yeah, no, it's a very exciting piece. And I think that's a piece that maybe people don't realize. They think like that we have a very flexible kind of mindset. And, you know, like, yeah, some firms focus on one particular type of project.
Mhm.
And okay, they may be more efficient, but they also may be more boring. You know, like we're just, you know, kind of giving the same answer. Whereas, you know, and maybe that's efficient, but maybe taking a fresh approach is also quite exciting. So I'm just sort of putting it out there that I don't think you should be worried that somebody doesn't have the expertise, because I think the other piece is that there's so many collaborators. There's so many collaborators. So you just bring in the pieces that are missing, and you can kind of learn from them, or just engage in a different way. So
And with the MCC specifically, you were in from the ground floor, right? You were there in the conceptual stages.
yeah, and we had these like huge town hall meeting kind of things where people just were like throwing everything in, like all the different organizations that wanted to be involved and what all their kind of pieces were and what that would look like. And it was totally exciting. It was really great. It was a good way to kind of know more about how this could be in this community.
Mm, nice. I can imagine it probably really exercises those creative muscles and energies as well when you're sort of like when the wheels are turning in this sort of research and potential phase.
Yeah, there was actually a good word that I got from a lecture last week, since we can attend lectures all over the place now, was we're particularly good at that sort of like the entanglement, like the projects are like an entanglement of all kinds of different perspectives and requirements and technical pieces and all this kind of, and yeah, we're kind of continually looking at the project from all these different angles. So that I think that's kind of part of the mindset, is not necessarily shutting out any information unless it really is not relevant, but just that in some way it all kind of comes into the project if it is totally salient and necessary. And that's a different kind of brain action that we have special entrance to. Yeah.
Fantastic. So let's chat about a little bit about your journey to get here. What was your education and training background?
So I did a 3-year, so I came out of high school and I went to University of Waterloo.
Mhm.
And their program at the time was a 3-year Bachelor of Environmental Studies and then a 2-year Bachelor of Architecture. So now everywhere seems to be a 3-year master's with options for how you might get there.
Mhm.
And then part of our study experience was co-op program, so cooperative program where you'd work for 4 months and you go to school for 4 months and back and forth, which was really great, except it was a recession. So we had all kinds of different jobs and we traveled all over the place. So it was actually a pretty great experience though, all around. And then there was a bit of an upswing after I graduated, but I still traveled. So I still did more traveling and working internationally. And then there is a piece, when I did come back to Canada, we started a piece of sort of being an intern where we have to assemble about 6,000 hours or 6,400 hours or something of very specific experience on very specific parts of jobs. And we need a mentor, and then we have to write a bunch of exams, which is kind of to make sure that we're really well grounded in the building code and Canadian Handbook of Practice, and that we really learned what we were supposed to have learned. And yeah, there's a big kind of learning arc, because you get certain kinds of, learning in school, and then there's very different environment working in the actual kind of workplace and construction sites and whatnot. So I think it was an incredibly vibrant and reality kind of adjusting way to sort of have this very theoretical, and then you're in the office, and then you're, so I think it was good. It was a good process. And then, yeah. And so then you write exams and eventually, hopefully you get your stamp. Yeah.
And so after you get your stamp and you've been working, is there an obligation for you to do continued training or continued
Yeah.
education?
Yeah. Yeah, as a self-governing profession, we must do continuing education, which is actually a very good idea because everything is changing all the time. As we all learn more about sustainability, now we don't even talk about that anymore. Now it's resilient design and carbon footprint is more important, and like everything is just changing constantly. So, and even like cultural context too, like the kind of cultural conversations we're having now, we weren't having those when I was in school. So it's very dynamic and changing kind of cultural practice. Yeah. As well as the technical things. Like new products coming online all the time. Yeah.
Of course, and I'd imagine the building code changes on a regular basis.
Oh, yeah. And the building code is like getting more and more environmental, and then it's also more and more inclusive and more, basically like better and better, know better, do better. So,
Mhm.
and yeah, and learning from various disasters and that sort of stuff. So it's good. It's good that it's learning. Yeah.
That's great. So architecture is very male-dominated field. Can you speak to whether this was an obstacle you faced in your career and what it's meant for your career journey?
Yeah, so interestingly, the school has been 50-50 since even before I was there. So I'd say even 10 years before I was in school. So it's been quite balanced in the sort of academic world. And I think even when I think of our profs, there was a fair balance. I'm not sure if it was 50-50,
Mhm.
but it was definite representation. And then there's also the opportunity to have visiting lectures anyway. So um, and then when you get into offices, they're also fairly uh, mixed. However, in management, it's mostly men, and then on job sites, building sites, construction sites, it's you hardly ever see another woman unless she's like another consultant. Or actually, recently I've started seeing women in trades. Yay! So I've seen a few women electricians, like maybe 3. I'm so excited. Um, yeah, so it's actually interesting though, because I think that, absolutely, I mean, misogyny is a systemic issue in the culture, so there's no way to sort of avoid it. But I think having a sort of professional um, kind of position on the job site puts me in a different kind of environment. And then also because the architect is the prime consultant, so they're the one that sort of like it's the umbrella to kind of make sure like it all we're the person that takes what the client needs and then translates it into something that people can add their stuff to, and then everybody's trying to make that happen so that there's a real sort of feeling of collaboration. And yeah, so I think that part's been really really positive. I think that there's maybe a lot of stuff that I don't see, so I just don't get asked for certain things, or and then there's just all the kind of latent behavioral things like you have to be fairly outspoken. And sometimes, people aren't used to that from a woman. So then they're like, oh, what's wrong with you? It's like, oh, haven't heard somebody with a good idea recently. So then that can kind of get a bit of blowback. But mostly I've found that just with work colleagues. So, which is disappointing. But yeah, I think it's important for women to kind of stay communicating because sometimes that stuff can make you feel a bit crazy or yeah.
So a couple of questions. One is, so you've mentioned that throughout your training and in school, there was a bit more of a balance or a mix, but am I understanding correctly that in practice there isn't so much? And why do you think that is?
Well, in architectural practice, there is a fair mix, but then I spent 10 years in design build, which is mostly construction and engineering. So then there's just not such a mixed representation there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, and you touched on this point of sort of women supporting each other. So moving forward, especially for those like yourself who are in these male dominated fields, I'm sensing that support network is something that's really important to you.
I think it's really important. And I think as sort of like, I think there was a certain kind of expectation coming out of like 70s feminism where you're just supposed to like champion on by yourself and not I don't know, it was just very solitary. And I think it just makes for a very lonely life. And I think that I really try and foster that connection for sure. And it's not always, I think it's just important to have connections outside your workplace. I think that's just a really healthy thing to do. And especially professional contacts throughout your working life, because I think you can get quite myopic in a workplace and it can feel like quite confining, and then you're sort of stuck in that dynamic. So especially when I meet young women engineers, I really stress it pretty hard because I think they're much harder hit than in architecture. But yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Can you share with us an interesting story that has happened to you since the start of your career? Anything in particular that stands out?
Yeah, so there's the one that I mentioned the other day, which is Hartog House. So like I said, it's the 20-unit transitional housing. And one day I was just doing a site check about a year after it opened, and there was a woman outside, and I said, how do you like it? And how do you like living here? And she said, I've never felt so safe in my life. And I nearly cried. I was like, thank you. I'm so glad. I worked really hard to make that happen. And so that was really a very wonderful moment because I worked really hard to kind of synthesize all those different kinds of kind of inputs to make it so that it was going to be a good feeling place, a place that was sort of endemically safe, like not just, cameras and whatever, like that's not safe. That doesn't make you feel safe. It doesn't actually make you safe anyway. So different kind of things. And so that was a really, that was the first project that I did that I was kind of like in charge of the design and the development. And it was really wonderful because I think I felt that I was bringing my whole self to the table. It wasn't just sort of filling in the boxes and making it fit all the requirements or something, but it was like I was really kind of bringing a more enriched sense of what it could be to live there, and who were the people that were most likely to be there. So
your research really paid off.
I think so. I think so.
And something that you had mentioned when we met the first time a couple days ago was that the way you had mentioned that it had to be you with your research and with all of your life experience to have created that design that was making such a profound difference in the lives of the clients and the users of that space. I think that is a really beautiful example of what it is that you do and how it's so much more than just the buildings that you're creating. Really moving. Can you share a story about a funny mistake that you made when you were first starting out?
I was trying to think. I mean, I did say the one that I did the other day, but I thought, well, maybe that just goes on too long, it's too technical. And then I thought of another one, which was actually at a meeting for Kindred. So I worked on the addition to Kindred plant in just outside of Midland, up on the highway. And again, it was one of the first projects that I was like going to all the meetings and doing all the drawings. I wasn't like totally running the project, but I was there for a lot of it. And you'll actually be talking to the engineer at the end of the month that was on the project. And I remember, I think it's a big meeting, lots of people from site and lots of consultants and whatever. And I guess I thought I was joking around at the beginning of the meeting and maybe making some lighthearted quips or something, but one of the old engineers at the table was not impressed and reported it to my boss, which I thought was like, oh, really? And I didn't even really understand what he had a problem with because he didn't talk to me. It was really weird. But I think that sort of desire to make connection, you got to sort of, take it slow. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You've touched on it, but one of the things that really struck me that I really learned from our conversation is this way that architecture is so much about collaboration. We were joking. I'm librarian. I refer to books. I've read Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, and I wouldn't have thought that architecture deals so much with other people. And you touched on the idea of the Starchitect. But really, there's so many people involved in architecture, and you're collaborating. It seems like all the time, right?
It's absolutely necessary. I mean, that was actually what such a, I mean, yeah, the whole Ayn Rand Fountainhead's a bit of a disaster for architecture, but oh well, that was a period in time. But and there's sort of continues that sort of like lone genius thing, but like it's just not the reality. And even, you know, the lone genius types, like, you know, Frank Gehry, he's got like, I don't know, 800 people in his office. Like he's not doing it by himself. Like anyway, yeah, it's and then and I think that the really great thing is when, you know, like so on a project like the MCC where I just had such feeling of gratitude at site meetings because it's like everybody is bringing their skills and their passion really to the table because they were all like wanted to make this a good project. And so people really were kind of bringing their piece and working together because not one person of any of the people can pull it off. So it really is collaborative. And as we watch movies in my little household, I'm always like blown away at the credits. And I really wish, you know, and I really highlight it to my daughters, like, look at all the people that did this together. And I wish that we would do that for buildings, but we don't. I mean, yeah, we barely even know who did it. So, or who did it, you know, the name of the firm or whatever. But and I think that, yeah, and then at the end also, you know, and also like how much actually goes right to pull it off is also quite astounding. And, you know, when a public building is done and people start complaining about this and that, I'm like, do you understand? What? Like, how much went right? Like, yeah. So.
It it boggles my mind because we sort of chatted about this and things that the average person may not consider, something like the MCC, that someone has taken careful consideration and thought into every single detail of a building like that, or any building, from the door handles through to the lighting design and fixtures, like things that you don't even realize that you're experiencing when you're experiencing them, that there's so much thought and considerations gone into those elements. I think it was you even who
Yeah, well, and the first few times when I went in after it was done, it was just like, it was like loud, like, oh my God, because everything I look at, I remember the story. I remember the meeting, I remember the arguments, I remember the trials and tribulations and accidents and strange things that, you know, it's just like, so many stories. So it eventually calmed down. My memory's not that good. But yeah, it's just dense with consideration. I mean, the feeling of like consideration that goes into such a project is really is lovely. I mean, can potentially be lovely. I think that sometimes people have other considerations that also come through in the architecture, like if it's mostly corporate and it's not actually meant to be fostering development, and you know, that also comes through. Yeah.
The other thing is that, you know, you were involved in the MCC in the conceptual days, and I came onto the team in 2012. So the involvement of an architect is quite extensive. You're involved through, it's not like you do the plans and then you do the plans and then you walk away. Am I right?
Well, yeah, and I wasn't the prime architect. It was Howard Rideout, but there was intense collaboration, and I think that it's, you know, and he had one employee, so we were also a big part of what else needs to be happening. So, yeah, it's there's a big arc of how a project happens, and then even after, kind of all the kind of other little pieces that need addressing. And yeah, it's a very long relationship, long and involved, and like you put a lot into it. Yeah.
I'm thinking of it similar to planning a wedding or an event like that. Like all these
Oh,
little,
wedding.
you know,
Yeah.
all these little details that, like, you know, that's like your string is a project similar to
Yeah.
that. We
And
do
then
have
multiply it till you get to like $9 million.
we do have
Yeah.
a question from the audience, and an audience member asks, have you encountered discrimination from men during your career?
I did actually. There was, I mean, like I said, there's that sort of sotto voce kind of endless systemic racism of like people like talking down and blah, 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 but not really overt. There was once, I think I sent an email to a town representative, I think around Midland, and the guy was like, "Oh, I don't want to hear from your secretary." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's so 1970s." So then I put all of my initials after my name. I was like, "Hello." Maybe we're not formally introduced. Like, yeah. So it's been pretty, I mean, I think because I also, like, I think you can't be really shy and retiring if you want to be an architect. You have to be a little bit like, here I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that sort of helps bamboozle some of that. But yeah, I think it's just at the systemic level. So it's just I won't have been offered opportunities that I just don't even know that I missed, or
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I can imagine that in a profession that deals so heavily with collaboration and meetings and discussions, there is the systemic complications with that. Talking over, talking down, not listening, those kinds of things. But
Yeah, I found that more with colleagues than with actually within projects. So those are long relationships. They're like family members. You have to work really hard at your colleague relationships.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
None of us is able to achieve success without some help along the way. Is there anyone in particular that you're grateful towards for who helped you get to where you are?
Well, of course, my parents are watching. Because of course, developing all these things takes a long time. And so big debt of gratitude there. And then also within my sort of professional life, I think I really have appreciated, especially now that I'm out on my own, the sort of things that I learned working for IHD and quantum engineering. So with Dave Lalonde, that he's very solution focused. And I think a lot of architectural practice is very try not and get sued oriented, as opposed to like, why don't we just fix the problem? Like, problems are going to come up. Anybody who thinks that's not going to happen hasn't been a human long enough. Like, it's just part of what happens. So I really appreciate how basically anything comes up. And then also working in a design build environment, that all the guys are solution focused. So like, and they're going to have different kind of pieces to add to that too. So I really appreciate that complete like 180 from being an architectural practice where there's a lot of like extra work that goes into it because you're just frightened that somebody's going to misread it and then blame you, which is such a drain of energy, as opposed to just like make it really clear and then talk to the people who are doing it and make sure you're having good conversation, which was really good. And then also a colleague of mine, Leah Wilger, who's also, I worked with her 20 years ago or so, and then she's also out on her own, and she's really become my co-conspirator in that, we often, a couple times a week would be like, oh, what do you think? So that's been really good. And yeah, I think there's people along the way that just, and clients, I mean, absolutely clients who you just learn so much with them. And I think as a self-employed person, you actually understand what a amazing thing it is for somebody to say, help me, you do what you do. And I really appreciate it. And so that's been a big kind of piece, because I've had a client for about 20 years. So like, we've been through a lot together. We've made several buildings together, and it's the Ontario Vipassana Center. So I'm really huge debt of gratitude to them for, we just keep working together because that relationship is now so rich, and we can be pretty frank with one another. So that's kind of fun too.
Great.
Yeah.
Seems like you've really built the trust there.
Yeah.
You touched on your parents, and I neglected to ask you, did you always want to be an architect?
I don't know. I do think that it happened fairly like early high school, maybe. And I think it was one of those, I really liked art history, but then I was good at math and science. And I don't know, like, and I'm from a whole family of engineers, so there are a lot of my engineers in my family. So it wasn't, I think, but then I was more kind of like cultural kind of slant. And Yeah, I think it's kind of a weird, it's almost like somebody from the outside has to tell you because I think that there's skills that I developed since a child. Like I think I was always spatial. Well, I know I was always a spatial minded person. And and so then you can kind of test that with yourself. Just remember something as long time ago as you can and tell me what you remember. And if it's actually the room and the quality of the light and the sort of arrangement of things in the room, I'm like, probably spatial. Yeah. Which is what I remember about kindergarten.
I was thinking about that all weekend long, and I was like, I can't for the like. I'm clearly not a special person because I can't remember what my kindergarten room looked like to the same sort of degree that you can. So clearly, I'm not built for architecture. There we go. I don't have to change careers now. But
Yeah.
but that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Can you tell us about a career accomplishment that you're most proud of? It doesn't even have to be one, it can be a couple.
Yeah, well, it was the thing that came to mind at first was the MCC. I mean, it really was such a great, all-encompassing, all hands on deck kind of bring your whole self kind of a job. And I think most of the guys involved were like building it, were all feeling very invested too. So I think that it was, you know, and we had such a great benefactor with Reinhardt Webber. So like it was just sort of such a great experience of let's just make it the best thing that we can make, you know, and that doesn't mean like, you know, so expensive, let's get all the most, you know, but it was just like let's really do the best job that we can think of. And it was, and I think it worked out really well. So I I think that was a great process. And I think also because I wasn't the prime architect, it just sort of gave me this sort of bigger view on it, as opposed to like really, you know, sweating it out on the details. So that was sort of a good vantage point too.
Are there any little known facts or interesting facts about the world of architecture that you'd like to share with our audience? Anything interesting?
I don't know. Well, I think it's that we have very diverse way of thinking, and that it's interesting that you know this entanglement, sorting through entanglements, so that it's actually a kind of mindset that we really need right now because things are really complicated with the whole climate piece and the like diversity piece. Like it's all very entangled, and that architects aren't just good at making buildings, but they're also good at problem solving in these really complicated, entangled situations and seeing opportunities. You know, I always say, like, just bring me all the information, all of it, you know, and it all will kind of like um, enrich the final kind of version. Um, so I think that there's that. I mean, I've heard much talk recently about design thinking, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I think it must mean something like that, that able to take such disparate and kind of random things and kind of create form or order out of it and meaning. Yeah.
What's it like to, we often talk about the vulnerability of the artist, doing the painting, writing the novel and putting the work out there. It's not something we necessarily associate with architects, but as you've pointed out, there's your building and the public is going through and has their comments about the design or this or that. How can you speak to what that's like to have your work out there?
Public.
Yeah, out there in the public in such a way.
Yeah, it can be very I remember yelling at somebody I worked with just when the MCC was in. I was like, stop it, you don't even say anything. Like, you don't know. I'm like, okay, I'm a little touchy. I'm like, all right. Like, I don't want to hear your gripey little complaints right now. You know, but yeah, I think I mean, you have to be very humble because you're not going to get it all right. And like I said, everything is continually evolving. So you kind of make your best take on it, given all the information and everything, you know, and all the skills. So I think it's very humbling. So you do your very best. And yeah, if somebody doesn't like it, it hurts for sure. And And it is very, and I think that that's sort of this blurry piece. Like if architecture is somewhere between art and engineering, it's the super blurry piece of like ownership. And you know, that you know, it's something that you've made up, which is actually quite stunning. Part of this is that you work so hard to make something up that you actually believe it's real, but it's not. Until you start cutting the ground, it doesn't, it's not real yet, which is that's very powerful. Like I don't, other cultures in the world revere architects very highly. This culture is not so good at that, but they really should, because it is this remarkable, you know, to sort of make something up. And anyway, but yeah, yeah, I
Our
don't know.
conversations have instilled in me a whole new appreciation for architects and what they do. And just from hearing the way you talk so passionately, and it's about, you know, about that entanglement piece, about taking in our considerations of what our society is doing culturally, environmentally, and being able to create what you do out of that. So our conversation has definitely done that for me. It's always, you know, being surrounded by literature every day, my brain automatically would go to the authors and that kind of thing. But it's from this meetings with you that have really allowed me to appreciate it in a whole new light. So thank you for that. We do have a question from the audience that asks if you have any architect idols.
I think I did. I don't know. It's always changing. I mean, certainly as a student, like you're much more form oriented, I think, because that's what your first inroad into architecture is. And I think as a general rule, I think Canada has a lot to learn from Scandinavia. So fortunately, I had the opportunity to study and work there in fourth year, which was in Finland. And then I also traveled to Sweden and Norway. And it was like, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And it's like, they do it all right. They're like, their housing is good. They're like, old folks' homes are good. They're, you know.
Can you give some examples? I have no idea.
I don't have names anymore because that's like, I don't know, 30 years old. And but yeah, the whole kind of Starchitect thing leaves me a little like, eh, because you go in those buildings and it's just like, eh, and I'm like, whatever. I mean, this is more like set design, or, you know, like, look at me. And I'm like, that's not, like, it's not very subtle. And that's fine. I mean, I think that, you know, again, like, not everybody's very spatial. And so that's actually a really great communicating device for lots of people, but not for me. So yeah, I think, yeah, I can't even think of, you know, like my favorite building or something, but usually it's moments within, like, you know, where something really kind of clicks, or where something is like, ah, this was really thought through. Thank you. You know, that sort of thoughtful piece. But yeah, that whole glam of Starchitecture thing, it's kind of like, eh, that's nice for some people. Yeah. It's more like, yeah, movie sets or something. Yeah.
When we're done here, I'll be Googling Scandinavian architecture to be like, hey, what are they doing? Like, what can we learn from that kind of thing?
Well, culturally too, like they take care of their culture and their cell, you know, like the Finland culture is like, they have architects on their money and artists and poets, because they know if they don't promote their culture, somebody's just going to roll over them again. So, and they have this like very modern aesthetic, but then very connected with nature. And it's like very poetic kind of pathos about the whole thing. I was like, ah, yes, this is what we should do, you know? But yeah.
I'm getting all the vibes hearing that. That's great.
Okay.
What are 5 things you wish someone had told you before you started your career, and why? Or what advice would you give to women specifically seeking to begin a career in architecture?
Yeah, I think I have 8. Yeah.
There, go for it. The more the merrier.
Yeah, it was interesting because I just sort of threw them out there and I was like, you know, you're awesome and you'll get this. Like, it's complicated. There's so much to learn and it's pretty overwhelming at first. And it's so competitive in school and so much ego and very, very sensitive students, and like it's really intense, but it's also very exciting. So like just keep going. And so part of that is like you're going to have to be courageous. So you have to speak your mind. You have to know your mind and be thoughtful and be you know, you don't just blurt things out, but like be very very courageous. And then and so ask all the questions, like all the questions. Don't leave anything unturned, because it's bound to like come back and bite you if you don't know. And likelihood is people aren't asking because they just are shy. So somebody else is going to want to know also, and then it will just bring the knowledge up everywhere. And so you can kind of have these kind of discussions. So don't be shy about that. And there's so many helpers. So reach out and ask questions, and yeah, that it's not a solitary undertaking. And then yeah, foster and maintain connections with women colleagues. It helps you not to feel crazy when having repeated experience that male colleagues don't. So just to have that kind of idea that it's not just about the people you work with, but which I really notice as a very strong difference of working in office versus working independently. So to try and cultivate that early on, that you're not in competition with all these other people. They're actually your colleagues. You're going to be doing this for like 40, 50 years. So like, you have to need this rich kind of connections. Yeah.
Mhm. Amazing. And I mean, like, so that my last question is like a stereotypical. I mean, I know I've thrown out the librarian, tag here a couple of times this evening, but tell us about a book that you love. And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to architecture, but it can be.
It's always fun when architectural kind of sensibility comes in a novel. So there's been some really great ones, like In the Skin of a Lion by Michael Ondaatje, and Fugitive Pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And The God of Small Things. And I don't know. Anyway, just variety of things. I think the most important book that I've read in the last little while, which, as I said, I have a young family, so I'm not getting a lot of reading in my own business. So was actually a book called Indigenous Rights by Chelsea Vowell. And I really recommend that all of us settlers check it out, because she does a really great and accessible job at kind of doing the arc of what we know about Indigenous cultures in Canada, what happened really, what we've been told, how that's affected the relationship, and what needs to change, and here's the way forward. And it just, I was really excited to read it because it was so accessible, and because it was such an arc, a broad arc, and it just filled in a lot of gaps. Being educated in the 70s and 80s in Canada, there was a lot of very, very dangerous oversights. So I'm very thankful for folks to have kind of done the work to bring us up. Yeah.
I love some of those options are fantastic, and bonus points for some great Canadian content in there.
Yeah.
I said that was my last question, but I just thought another one. Are you working on anything now that you're super excited about, or any interesting projects that's coming down the pike?
Yeah, so it's a variety of things. There's always seems to be a daycare kind of lurking around, because I'm sort of connected now with somebody who works on developing daycare. So that's interesting. And there's a house edition, and there's potentially some townhouses. And I'm actually helping a colleague that I went to high school with, who's an artist, develop public art proposals, which is totally exciting because I don't have any access to that world otherwise. So it's been actually really great. And she doesn't have like the sort of project managey type skills that I have. So then it's been, hey, what about this? So that's been fun. Just that idea of like, there's all kinds of different ways to collaborate on all kinds of different projects. So that's exciting. And then also that I sort of, when I go to these meetup groups, they're always like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh, nobody asked me that before. Like, here's your project, do it. And I was like, well, like there's so much talk in Kitchener-Waterloo about the affordable housing crisis and homelessness. And I'm like, well, like I have skills, I can help in that, but I don't, necessarily know who's doing it. And anyway, so I'm just trying to work up that piece of it. And so then it's kind of my personal sort of research project is finding more about that. And then also kind of really accessible ways to do it, because there's some grants that you have to like be up and built in 12 months. Well, you can't do a conventional building. So, well, what are you doing? Well, what are the options? And so like there's all these kind of moving parts. And that feels exciting, because that's, I think, how, you know, you get involved with projects that really kind of feed you kind of as a whole person, is just like, well, what do you want to do? Which is like such a big, scary question. So we'll see.
That's great. And it sounds like you'd be perfect for that kind of job, especially given your experience, the ones that you've done here in the area. For your friend who's doing the public art applications, the town of Midland has just announced that they just opened a new application process for public art.
Oh.
So you can see the town. This is the library's community hub. You can see the town of Midland's website for that for more information. I don't know the details. I just saw it on Instagram earlier today. So
okay, great.
Does anyone from our audience have any other questions? We have a couple of minutes left. You can feel free to drop them into the chat box. Carole, our conversations have been very enlightening for me, and your passion and enthusiasm for your field is evident in the way that you talk about it, and it helps to get other people jazzed and excited and looking at their world in a different way. As I mentioned, all weekend long, I was so much more aware of the spaces I was in, or even the spaces that I was taking in, even watching the Golden Globes and things like that. So thank you so much for your time this evening, and for speaking with us about your career and your journey and your experiences. I really appreciate that. And thank you to you, our audience, for spending your Monday evenings with us. We appreciate having you. And you can check out the website for a full list of our upcoming guests. Next Monday on March the 8th, which is International Women's Day, we'll be speaking to Kathy Willis, the Executive Director of Operation Grow here in the town of Midland at 7 p.m. on Monday, March the 8th. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you all a great evening and happy International Women's Day.